Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you about feminist criticism based on the book Critical Theory Today by Louis Tyson. I'm going to go through my summary based on reading the feminist criticism section in the book, like the definition, the background, connections with gender studies, and more. So let's get started. So, what is feminist criticism? Feminist criticism is a way of examining society, culture, and literature that questions how gender roles are created, enforced, and used to maintain power. It explores how language, stories, traditions, and social norms teach people what it means to be masculine or to be feminine, and how these expectations shape opportunities, behavior, and identity. This approach, though, does not aim to elevate women over men. Its purpose is to reveal and challenge beliefs that limit anyone based on gender, and to imagine a world where people can define themselves freely. Society has long taught that gender traits are natural when they are actually learned through culture, family, and media. From childhood, boys are encouraged to be strong and dominant, while girls are taught to be gentle and accommodating. Now, this system, called patriarchy, privileges men and limits women's choices. Historically, it denied women education, political voices, and independence, and today it still appears through subtle biases like pay gaps, doubts about women's leadership, and pressure to balance beauty, career, success, and caregiving. But patriarchy harms men too, by restricting emotional expression and tying masculine things to power and control. Now, culture and media reinforces these norms by rewarding passive women and heroic but emotionally distant men. Traditional stories and modern beauty standards teach that women must be pleasing and controlled, while men must lead and hide their weaknesses. Feminist criticism challenges these assumptions and reveals how gender roles are socially constructed. It argues for freedom of choice and for women to pursue domestic life or careers and for men to express emotions without shame. It exposes bias in language, literature, and institutions that have historically treated male experience as universal and puts aside women's voices. By showing that gender is shaped by society, not biology, feminism encourages more inclusive and flexible identities. Its goal is not just equality, but liberation from these restrictive expectations, allowing everyone to live with authenticity and live freely. Now, a main challenge for feminist thought is how to move past patriarchal ideas when everyone grows up with them. Even though patriarchy shapes society, it cannot fully control how people think. People can still notice unfairness and question traditional beliefs, which allows change to happen. But progress is not always smooth. Society can improve in some areas but fall back in others. So feminism encourages constant awareness and resistance. Feminist scholars are also careful when using theories created by male-dominated fields like psychoanalysis or Marxism, because these ideas sometimes contain sexism. However, they still take useful concepts from these theories and reject the biased parts. Feminism uses ideas from many fields, such as psychology, Marxism, and language studies, to understand how gender roles are formed and reinforced. It challenges false beliefs, like men are rational and women are emotional, arguing that these ideas support inequality. Feminism also says that complete objectivity is impossible because everyone sees the world through their own experiences. Instead of pretending to be natural, feminist scholars are open about their perspective. This makes feminist theory flexible, self-aware, and open to different voices. Rather than claiming one absolute truth, feminism believes knowledge changes over time and grows when we recognize how our backgrounds influence our understanding. Now, there are two key approaches to feminism. First is French feminism and second is multicultural feminism. French feminism looks at gender differently from many Anglo-American thinkers. Instead of focusing mainly on laws, institutions, and material inequality, it turns inward to language, psychology, and the deeper structures of thought that shapes the ideas of womanhood. It argues that patriarchy exists not only in society, like in schools, politics, and workplaces, but also in the way we speak, we write, and create meaning. To truly change gender relations, we must also change the symbolic systems that define femininity. A central idea is that Western culture has historically defined women as the other, meaning women are only seen in contrast to men, emotional instead of rational, passive instead of active, body instead of mind. These oppositions are not natural facts, but cultural inventions that exist in social roles, and the unconscious and the language. Because of this, French feminists argue that gender liberation cannot rely only on legal and social reforms. It must also transform the mental and symbolic systems that make women view themselves through a male-centered perspective. French feminists believe that women's bodies and personal experiences should be valued, not ignored. They do not argue that women are only defined by biology, but they say patriarchy has silenced female physical and emotional experiences. So they highlight intuition, emotion, and maternal experience as meaningful ways of knowing the world, qualities society has often dismissed as feminine. Language is a major focus. Traditional language and writing, shaped by male experiences, can limit how women express themselves. French feminists encourage more open, emotional, and creative writing styles that do not follow strict logic or structure. Their aim is not to force one way of writing for women, but to create a space for new expression that challenges patriarchal meaning. They also adapt ideas from psychology, philosophy, and linguistics to show how deeply patriarchy shapes thought, working not to only critique old systems, but to build new ways of thinking, speaking, and being. Now, we move on to multicultural feminism. Multicultural feminism developed when feminist scholars realized that gender alone cannot explain women's oppression. Women's experiences are also shaped by race, class, sexuality, nationality, and culture. For a long time, feminism in places like the United States mainly reflected the views of white, middle-class, heterosexual women. As a result, many feminist ideas claimed to speak for all women, but often ignored or erased the needs of women from different backgrounds. This approach argues that womanhood is not one universal experience. A woman in the United States does not face the same challenges as a woman in India or Iran. And even within the same country, a wealthy white woman's life is very different from that of a poor black woman, an immigrant woman, or an indigenous woman. Racism, class, inequality, colonial history, and sexual orientation all shape how patriarchy affects different women. Therefore, meaningful feminist solidarity must recognize differences, share power, and center voices that have been pushed aside. Black feminist thought was especially important in showing the limits of feminism that ignores race. Because black women often showed a double struggle, excluded in white feminist spaces because of race and overlooked in black political movements because of gender. Their experiences show that racism and sexism are intertwined, not separate problems. So, overall, multicultural feminism argues that feminist theory must consider race, culture, class, sexuality, and history. No single perspective can explain every woman's experience. Instead, feminist criticism becomes a space where multiple identities and viewpoints overlap, such as black feminism, queer theory, Marxist feminism, and post-colonial feminism. By embracing diversity and complexity, multicultural feminism strengthens the feminism movement and insists that true liberation must include all women and all identities. Now, alongside feminism, there is gender studies. So, what is the connection? Gender studies developed closely alongside feminism. Feminism first highlighted how gender shapes life, influencing how people see themselves, how others treat them, and how institutions like schools, workplaces, law, and medicine enforce the expectations. It revealed that gender is not just a personal identity, but a social system that creates privilege for some and disadvantage for others. Over time, scholars recognized that questions about masculinity, femininity, and identity belong to a larger field. Gender studies examines how societies define gender roles, how these roles limit people, and how gender interacts with sexuality, biology, and culture. A major goal is to challenge beliefs often treated as biological facts but actually shaped by culture. For example, Aggression in men and nurturing in women are strongly influenced by social learning, not biology. Research also shows that men who actively parent form emotional bonds with children just as strongly as women, highlighting that caregiving is learned, not innate. By exploring these myths, gender studies and feminism challenge stereotypes and restrictive norms. They emphasize that gender should be a flexible space for individual expression rather than a set of rigid rules. So, concepts like gender identity, androgyny, and many more reflect the diversity of human experience. The shared goal is to create a world where everyone can define themselves freely, with dignity, and without being forced into roles assigned at birth. Now, let's shift to the connection between feminism and literature. Feminism and literature are closely connected because stories often reflect and shape how a society thinks about gender and power. Feminist literary criticism studies how texts show patriarchal values, sometimes by reinforcing them and sometimes by challenging them. Early feminist critics examined classics that were praised as great literature and revealed how they normalized sexism, often without realizing it, because society viewed gender roles as something natural. Reading from a feminist perspective means asking how a text supports traditional gender expression or offers space to question them. Some literature strengthens patriarchy by presenting women mainly as helpers, supporters, or symbols for men rather than as full individuals. These stories often reward good women who are quiet and self-sacrificing, while portraying independent or outspoken women negatively. Other literature challenges these norms by showing how gender roles harm both women and men, or by highlighting solidarity among women as a form of resistance. Many works fall in between, revealing feminist concerns but still carrying patriarchal ideas, often because the authors themselves lived within restrictive gender expectations and could not fully escape them. Feminist literary criticism asks key questions. Who has power in the story? Whose voice is centered and whose is ignored? How are women portrayed and what roles are they allowed to play? Do the narratives support traditional gender norms or invite readers to rethink them? The goal is not only to criticize sexist representations, but to better understand how culture shapes gender and to imagine more equal and complex ways of seeing women, men, and human experience itself. We move on to the very last section, questions feminists ask about when reading literature. Just a quick review. So, feminist criticism offers guiding questions to help readers analyze literature. These questions aren't strict rules, they are starting points to uncover how gender works in a text and to reveal the power structures hidden in stories, characters, and language. Some of these questions come from gynocriticism, which is a part of feminist criticism focused specifically on women's writing and interpreting from a female point of view. So the questions. First, how does patriarchy operate? Does the story support traditional gender roles? For example, active men, passive women, or does it challenge those hierarchies? Does the narrative expose or resist the idea that male experience is the only important one? Second, how do factors like race, class, sexuality, and nationality intersect with gender to shape a woman's opportunities, challenges, or identity in the text? 3. How is gender defined? Do the characters stick to narrow, traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity? Does the text punish characters who defy these roles, or does it imagine new, flexible ways to expressing the identity? 4. Is there solidarity? Do the women in the story offer each other support and sisterhood to resist the oppression? Or do divisions and conflict between women end up reinforcing the patriarchal power structures? And fifth, what was the reception history? If the author is female, how was the work treated when it was first published? Was it undervalued or ignored simply because a woman wrote it? How did the historical context limit or influence the female author's creativity and self-expression? Okay, so that was my summary. We've reached the end of my video. So now for some closing statements about feminist criticism. So we've covered the main ideas of feminist criticism. The central purpose of this approach is to question how culture and stories create fixed ideas of what it means to be male or female. It argues that these roles are not natural, but are socially constructed by a system called patriarchy. This system unfairly limits everyone. Feminist criticism aims for liberation, for freedom, not just equality, by showing that gender can be flexible and that different voices from races, classes, and culture, also known as intersectionality, must be heard. By asking critical questions about literature and society, the movement seeks to challenge these restrictive expectations and imagine a world where everyone can live with dignity and being their true self. And so, we've reached the end of my video. Thank you for your attention and for exploring this topic with me. I hope this video will help give a basic understanding about feminist criticism. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.